Model to guide the grieving cycle. Introduction. Psychologists have conducted numerous studies to develop the most appropriate model to guide the grieving cycle. Grief is an emotional process that is associated with the loss of loved ones or property that has sentimental value. According to findings from psychological researchers in the past, it is essential for people, especially children, to be guided through the grieving process. The grieving process is associated with certain desirable behaviors that form a cycle, which must be followed by the victims. One of the renowned stories about grief in the Bible is the story of Job. Job was tested by the devil, and through his story, it is possible to create a correlation between the grieving stages he portrayed, with some of the scientific findings of grief. This paper compares and contrasts Job's grieving story with Kubler-Ross's model of the grieving cycle. Compare and contrast. Kubler-Ross's grieving cycle consists of 5 main stages, which include denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. According to the model, people are supposed to transition from one state to the other as they get over their loss. The stages of grief are associated with people affected by the loss of loved ones or property with sentimental value. The story of Job in the Bible is one of the classic representations of the extreme grief. Job went through the 5 stages of grief highlighted by Kubler-Ross's model, but there were some differences in the kind of behavior that he portrayed at every stage. Job's case was not normal, but it clearly reveals that with wisdom, people can guide themselves through the 5 stages of grief. It is important to look into the specific stages of grief to develop an understanding of the similarities and differences between Kubler-Ross's model and Job's story. Denial is the first stage of the grief model, but Job did not portray any signs of denial. Job recognized that his earthly possessions were not important to him, thus, he was not in denial when he lost everything. His wisdom helped him get over the attachment that most people have for their material belongings. In the normal cases, people fall into denial when they lose a close relative or a possession. The second stage is anger, and it is normally associated with anger toward the Supreme Being for taking away relatives. Job was angry when he lost everything, and he resulted in cursing the day he was born, but he did not express his anger toward God as many people do in the grieving process. Job portrayed weakness in the bargaining stage. Job's behavior was a typical reaction at this stage of the cycle, whereby he wished he was dead to end his misery. The bargaining stage of grief is associated with people hoping that they could change things. Depression is the 4th stage of the grief model, and it entails the victims falling into a state of hopelessness. Job went into depression when he contacted his 3 friends for advice about his situation. Their inability to provide a wise solution made things worse for Job. Acceptance is the last stage of grief, and it is associated with the victims coming to terms with the actual situation and accepting the loss. Job's case is unique because it seemed like he accepted his loss immediately. Acceptance came first in his case, and this is one of the fundamental differences between his case and the provisions of Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. Interaction between joy and the grieving model. Joy and grief are emotional processes that enable humans to appreciate what they have. While grief is associated with a series of changing emotions, joy is a single emotion that provides people with the will to enjoy life and appreciate life. After the grieving process, people have to achieve joy and celebrate whatever they have. Acceptance entails the development of an appreciation of whatever is left after a tragic experience. Joy wipes out the bad memories, and it gives people the will to live a fulfilling life even after a heavy loss. Job's case reveals the power of joy through Job's appreciation of God's love after the trial period. Job trusted God with his life, and he was hopeful that he would deliver him from the evil times he was facing. He was joyous when God finally blessed him with more possessions than he ever had. Preferred method of handling grief. Kubler-Ross's grief cycle is appropriate because it helps people understand the behaviors portrayed during the various stages of grief. Understanding the cycle can help people grieve positively. My preferred method of dealing with grief is mourning and crying until one can let go of the loss. This research has changed my view on grief, and I believe that Kubler-Ross's model is the most appropriate way to handle grief. Conclusion. Kubler-Ross's grief model indicates that there are 5 stages of the grieving process. People must go through these stages to get over their loss. The story of Job is a good example of someone who went through the 5 stages. There are several contrasting aspects between Job's story and the behaviors expected of people undergoing the 5 stages of grief. Joy is a result of grieving positively.